Welcome to Season 2 of Gray Maybe, a limited series podcast and social experiment based on this season's topic, the body. My name is Jillian Schmitz. I'm a professional dancer, actor, teacher, author, artist, and cat lover. Through my own personal journey of recovery, I've found that things aren't just black or white, or as simple as yes or no. For me, in my recovery, there has been mostly gray area and a lot of maybes. In most of my stories, you can find the gray maybe. I will be sharing my own process through personal stories, interviews, and hopefully stories from listeners in an effort to help lessen the stigma and shame of disordered eating disorders, and body image. If you'd like to share your story of ED recovery on this podcast, anonymous or otherwise, please email graymaybestories@gmail.com. graymaybestories@gmail.com. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're using to catch future episodes of Gray Maybe. A note before we begin. The topic of disordered eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and other behavior related to the body may not be difficult for me to share anymore, but it wasn't always this way. I recognize and anticipate the possibility of judgment or disbelief about my experiences, ranging from my own family members to strangers, in addition to the potentiality of losing certain opportunities for publicizing my own experiences. My stories and the stories of others on this podcast are told through the lens of our own experience. The revelation of our process is ours to tell. If you disagree with the views or stories on this podcast, know that we are not speaking on anything other than our own experiences and viewpoints. Take what you like and leave the rest. Nothing expressed or mentioned in this podcast is an endorsement or is meant to be taken as suggestion or advice. It is strictly the sharing of our own experiences and recovery. Any feelings this podcast activates in the listener is for the listener to process and recover from. Any criticism you have based on these experiences and choices are yours, and they are not anyone else's burden to carry. Trigger warning: eating disorders, disordered eating, body dysmorphia, anorexia, cutting, suicide, sexual assault, fat phobia, weighing and measuring, weight notice, anxiety, depression, and physical injury. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Gray Maybe. Today's episode, I have someone who I consider a friend of mine and a peer, someone I've worked with as a teacher, someone I've worked with as a dancer, and someone that I met through another very special person. This person's name is Nancy Dobbs Owen. I met her years ago through Matthew Dickens, who has passed. He is someone very, very dear to both of us. He was doing a choreographed piece for a concert. That is how we met. I think I might have even recommended her to him, or maybe I met her through him, and then I recommended her to the PAC, which is where we've both taught for many, many years. I'm still there. She has moved on to bigger campuses. But my friend Nancy Dobbs Owen is a lovely, lovely ballet dancer and teacher. And so without more further ado, she will enrich her intro. But Nancy Dobbs Owen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, hi. Oh my gosh. We're talking officially. It's so weird.
We're talking officially. Yes.
Not
yes,
just
it is.
be in the dressing room, like, oh my God, that class.
Yes, we do. Most of our conversations are not public. That is true.
Right? It's interesting that way. Yeah, I think you got it all right. I think we met on that job, and then
I think we did.
I got hired at PAC because Nancy had remembered me from the shoot because we ended up shooting there.
That's right.
And
that's
she's
right.
like, wait.
And we were looking for a ballet dancer or ballet teacher.
Exactly. Yeah. And she was like, wait, this girl was just in my studio. She must be the one. And how many years later? When I talk about our friendship, actually, I say that everything that's happened to me in LA stems from my friendship with Jillian because of that, right? Because I was brand new to LA when I did Matt's job. That was literally the first thing I did here. And everything happened from that. So
That's so
you're my guiding star.
Oh my gosh. I feel so privileged. And how did you just really quickly because I just want to know.
Yeah.
How did you know Matt? How did you get to know Matt? How were you linked up with him?
I think I answered an audition notice and he was just like,
Okay.
I like you. You're quirky.
Oh my gosh. And I gotta say, I miss him so, so much. Like
Yeah,
he was really, really special. I think I also was the one who told you he passed. I think I was the one who
you
had to
did. You
make that
called
phone
me
call.
so I didn't find out on Facebook, which I was
Yeah.
eternally grateful for.
Yeah, I that was not a fun phone call to make. But we were able to kind of be with each other in that sadness.
Yeah.
Well, let's freaking get into it. You are here. You're here on season 2. We know what season 2 is about. If you don't know, it's about the wide umbrella of disordered eating, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, all of the things. We are not straying away from any one corner of this topic. So I will start with if you would please tell us, do you remember when it began for you? What do you recall were some of the earliest signs or symptoms, behaviors of whatever your thing is?
So, it's so interesting because when you sent your questions, I was like, when did it start? And I do not recall a time where food was not an issue or lack of food was not an issue. My mom jokes that when I was a baby, all I would eat is peach yogurt.
Mm,
Literally, all I would eat was peach yogurt. And
mm.
so as I was a very like athletic kid, I was always in gymnastics and sports and stuff. I didn't start dancing till I was 14. But it was all
Really?
yeah.
You seem like a 3-year-old ballerina to me. You seem like the kid that started at 3.
I started
Wow.
well, okay, I'm lying a tiny little bit here. I did take ballet when I was 3 and
But you didn't continue. You
oh no,
picked back up at
I dropped out at like 4.5 because
Okay, yeah, that doesn't count. You got to
yeah,
be like continuous. I mean, not to say nobody counts. Sorry, but like I you seem to me because especially because your main focus is ballet or was ballet,
yeah,
teach you ballet, all the ballet. That is so so rare to start that late for ballet. Not dance in general because people start at all different ages. But if you're
yeah.
listening to the podcast, you don't know much about dance. For ballet, that's incredibly late. How exceptional. Okay, sorry, go on.
So, and my sister and I were teeny little things. But the first like actual control situation that I recall, and we can get into it when you were talking about, I remember one of your earlier podcasts, I'm bouncing back and forth, but you were talking about your dad and the talking about other people. So and so is heavy, so and so is fat, and identifying in that way. My dad was very much like that. My dad was very slender himself, very judgmental, very controlling about what he ate. So it was always part of our zeitgeist in our family in a way. But my mom went to law school when my sister and I were quite young, like 6 and 7, and they sent us away for an entire summer. And while my sister
Where? To where?
to this camp in Santa Cruz, California,
What kind of a camp? Just
like
camp?
sleepover, you go away for the entire summer and do not see your family, which is
Like camp in the wilderness?
yeah, cabins,
Like
sports.
boarding school, but outdoorsy.
Yeah, exactly. With all of the
Okay.
weirdness that boarding school has, so totally.
Right? Okay.
And I hated it. I effing hated it. I do not like being dirty. Right there. Like it was bad. My sister, it was the best part of her year. Like she was able to like be happy. Our childhood, which I'm not going to get into too much, was not great. But so for her, camp was like a refuge. But for me, I hated it. I was terrified all the time. I was just not like, I'm super, super, super shy, even as an adult. When I was young, it was bad.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it didn't happen the first year I was there, but the year I was 12, I just decided that the one thing I could control while I was there was eating. And I was like, I'm not going to eat this shit. I probably didn't swear because I was a very polite child. But I was just like, I'm not going to eat this. And I lost 12 pounds and I was 12 years old. Like I was a small
Mm,
kid who lost 12 pounds
mm-hmm,
and no one noticed.
mm.
And I was like, and the fact that no one noticed, but also the fact I did it was this really interesting control situation.
Right. You're like, look what I did.
Yeah.
Look what I did. I made this happen, but then not being celebrated for being able to do it or noticed.
Yeah. Or worried about either, to be honest. It should
Right.
have been
Right.
worrisome.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like nobody cared. It
Yeah.
seemed like nobody cared because nobody
Yeah.
noticed.
So that's the
There's
first like
something
really big thing about that I remember. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you. There's something
No,
about
no, what I need to stop. I'm trying to be not so talky on the podcast and let people talk. It's not going well. But there's something that you said because you're the first person who has said, and maybe I might be forgetting someone, and I don't mean to forget anyone, but this you're the first person that said like nobody noticed. Oftentimes people will drop this weight and people will be concerned, even if it's negative attention, like you look so great, which it's a negative for someone who's having an issue. It's not negative
hmm
if you're like, trying to be healthier and your doctor has said whatever, all that.
right.
I think you know what I mean. But you're the first person that said no one noticed. Now, there's something really fascinating about eating disorders, especially the type where you do lose a lot of weight, where you're restricting, of disappearing. Like, how much can I disappear before nobody sees me at all? Or how much, yeah.
That has been my goal.
The hands are up. The hands went up. She just went up
Yes. How much can I disappear? And
before someone notices.
before someone notices. And uh in many cases no one ever does. Or
Mm.
they don't want to be rude, so they don't say anything, right? So this has been like
Mm-hmm.
kind of a weird recurring theme through my whole life is like how small can I get? How effed up can I be before someone says something? And
Mm.
which is kind of shameful and pathetic when I think about it, but also kind of sad if I'm thinking about it from an outsider in, right? So there's this
Right.
dual thing of like, is it shameful? Am I shameful? Or am I crying for help? Or am I both?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right. Well, it's like the self shame of it for yourself. But if it were anybody else, you would be like, oh my God, don't do that. Like, oh my God,
Yeah.
but for yourself, it's like, I'm terrible and this is shameful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was like the first big episode of it. And then, um, you know, I hit puberty a little bit late, and then that became an issue with dance, of course. Like every other ballet dancer, you're like, what are these? They were never here before. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
like them. um, and so going into classical ballet, I think I'm the first person who ever took a jazz class, and the teacher was like, maybe you should try ballet instead. I think you'd be better there. Um, and to be fair, they were right. Ballet and my body like each other a lot, or used to. uh,
Well,
and
if you got all that turnout, don't be coming into this jazz class. That's all I'm saying. Don't waste all that turnout in jazz because you probably ain't going to use it. Well, not as much, anyways.
so my audition for Rent, the movie, literally, that's what Keith said when I walked in the room. He was like, "All that turnout, leave it at the door."
And you were like, oh no.
I didn't even know him yet. I was still in the Bay Area. I had never met him before, and I was like,
Mm.
Okay." It was funny. But so I started ballet, and then suddenly, you know, it was important to be as thin as possible. It was important to eat as little as possible. It suddenly became part of my world in a very excusable way, right? Well, everyone does it. That's what everyone does.
Mhm.
And through high school, um, I played around. I was a little, I restricted quite a bit, but not much more than anyone else in the late 80s, early 90s, right? I mean, none of us were eating then, really. But the joke was, oh, Nancy will just get a child size, or we'll go get frozen yogurt. Nancy wants a child size because she doesn't want to eat that much, and dancing
Mm.
all day. And then it kind of chilled out, actually. I was going to go to North Carolina School of the Arts, and that got messed up at the very, very last minute. So I ended up going to UC Irvine and kind of was like, oh, my life is over. And, I did the freshman 5 or freshman 10 or whatever. And then towards the end of the year, and I'm not going to use names here, but a ballet teacher there, and UCI has a very strong ballet program. So I was like there as a ballet dancer. And he said, what do you want to do when you graduate? And I was like, well, I want to be a ballet dancer. And he said, well, you don't look like you do.
Mm.
And I was like, oh.
Mm.
When I came back, I sure did.
Mm.
So I actually got a job that summer with a ballet company, and stayed out of school the next fall season and danced professionally. So I was like 18, danced the fall season with a ballet company and came back in the spring to do another semester. And he was one of the first people I saw, and he was like, oh, okay, now I see it.
Mm.
And what he saw was I had stopped eating pretty
Mm.
much. And so then I went to Joffrey. There's a lot of like traveling and different teachers and different mentors in here. And the ballet aesthetic at that time was literally emaciated.
Mm-hmm.
So
Skeleton.
it was skeletal. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would go in and out of being like on weight probation, even though I was just absolutely, I look back on pictures and I'm like, what were they telling me to get rid of? Like
What is
literally.
wait, like they're putting you on weight probation,
Yeah.
like
So if,
you need to lose weight
yeah. So they're
in a
like
ballet company.
in a ballet company. Exactly.
Okay.
There are weigh-ins, but it was also rather arbitrary, which is interesting. My roommate and I, when I was at Joffrey Ballet, I will name drop here. When I was at Joffrey Ballet, we were the exact same size, literally the exact same size. We were both on weight probation, me for being too heavy, her for being too thin.
Okay, but
It,
they put you on weight probation for too thin, but were they like winking while they did it? Were they like, "Oh, you're too thin, wink, wink, keep going." Like let's be real.
I think so. I was never when I was at Joffrey, it was always like you're too heavy. Um,
Mm.
until I dropped whatever amount they wanted me to drop. It was not very much. I already wasn't eating, so run an extra 5 miles a day or whatever. So that's when it got very intense in my head,
Mhm.
right? And then, I joke with people because I don't joke. It's not really a joke. It's when I'm being truthful. People are like, well, how long have you been in recovery? And I'm like, I don't think I am in recovery. I think I'm
Mm.
constantly working towards being recovered, or I'm,
Mhm.
quote, I'll say I'm barely recovered, right?
Mhm.
I'm functioning. I'm much better at maneuvering through the mindset that I'm not sure ever goes away,
Mhm.
right? Um, one of the things you've said a few times is toleration versus body
Mhm.
positivity, right?
Mhm.
Can I tolerate my being right now? And
Mhm.
if I can tolerate it, we're having a
Mhm.
good day.
For real. For
Right?
real.
It's like, okay, I don't literally feel like jumping off a cliff right now. I can tolerate being in the skin that I am in at this moment.
Right.
Um, and that's where I feel like if I'm there, we're doing okay. I'm also
Right.
old, I've been doing this a really long time. And at a certain point, you're just like, okay, I don't care if you are depressed and this and that. You have a 15-hour day and you have to at least consume food at this time of day and this time of day.
Mhm. Right. Right.
Like, so I've become very regimented,
Mhm.
which I don't necessarily think is healthy in a like free to be you and me. We all are, everything's great and that, but I maintain plus or minus, a safe space to be in, right?
I think
If
that's
that,
actually very recovered because we do like I am very aligned in that as well where I have to talk to myself like I'm my own parent or like I'm taking care of a baby. Like you have to eat. Make sure you eat.
Hmm.
Yes, you're stressed. You still have to eat. Oh, you have a long day. Well, where are you going to get your food? Like, I have to do that because if it's up to me, I'm just not going to.
Right.
It's not even, I may not even be like I'm trying to lose weight. I want to lose weight. It's even just bad habits are bad habits, and it's when I get anxious and busy, I feel like it takes too much time. I don't want to spend the money. I have all these excuses and reasons, but they're all old behavior, right? But it's so easy to slip back into that. So I actually find you saying that like not only very relatable, but also part of recovery. That sounds so much like recovery. But I also get that it is constantly a scale and a work in progress. I am very sus, short for suspect, of people who say that they like, oh, I had an eating disorder back when I was, whatever age.
Right.
Now, I'm not going to argue with anyone about their experience, and I'm certainly not going to say that that's not true or that whatever. But I'm like, "Oh, that's cool that like you had that and you don't have that anymore," because I'm relate to you where I'm like, I don't think this is ever going to go away. It's like, is it dormant or is it not? Is it, and that could be moment to moment. That's like, I like that you said that your first episode, quote unquote, because to me, it is like episodes. It's like a flare up, right? Now, I could have 5 flare ups during one day, or I could have one flare up a year. I could have like 5 mini fires and then one big, like brush fire, something that consumes acres, or I could have these little tiny fires I got to put out. But that does feel very episodic for me.
Yeah.
Um, I relate to that. I also, you had said, um, talking about, it sounded like, correct me if I'm wrong, there is like an identification with smallness. Like that being small can start to become part of your identity. Like, oh, get Nancy the small. Oh, she's not going to eat. And in social situations, whereas it might be cute, funny, and like, but that is shaping amongst your group what that person is. And for me, growing up, I didn't have a really strong sense of self. So when people are giving you a category or a box to fit in, and you feel accepted even if it's not positive, that's very enticing. That is like really, if you're starving emotionally, if you're starving for connection and someone's going to offer you that even if it's in something negative, like someone like me is going to take that. Maybe not nowadays, but back then 100% for
Oh, for
sure.
sure.
So there's
Yeah.
like, in addition to the the difficulty of having something like this, it can be really hard to get better if that's your identity. Because not only is the identity tied to, what you do, which is hard for us dancers as we get older and our bodies start failing or transitioning, however you want to think about that, but
Feeling's
also the
good.
identity, right? The identity of being small or being super thin or not eating or no appetite or I'm the little one, I'm the skinny one, I'm the smallest one. Those are all, that's like, you know, identity is really, really tough to divorce from. Until you have to do it, you may not realize how difficult it is. So I'm glad you brought that up. Um,
Yeah.
do you do you identify with anything specific? Like when I identify, I say like I'm restrictive. I'm orthorexic. I have a tendency sometimes to binge eat. And I have body dysmorphia. Like I'm very body dysmorphic or body obsessed.
Hmm. I think my clinical diagnosis is definitely anorexia.
Mm-hmm.
Although never good enough. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that I think that's been a theme through almost all of your guests, where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm I don't eat at all, and yet I'm still not whatever that scale is. That
Right.
makes
Do you
me,
qualify?
yeah. Do
Do
you
you
qualify
qualify?
as a real anorexic?
Yeah.
So my things, if you're going to put them in quotes, would be
Mm-hmm.
restricting for sure, over exercising,
Mm-hmm.
a lot still.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Orthorexia is probably a part of it, although,
Mm-hmm.
and this is, I don't know if a clinician would be like, this is bad, but I actually think that being a vegan helped me create stability. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very strict about that, but it also actually let me be a little freer in some ways because there were parameters. And I think for me, a lot of it comes down to control. And so my really serious episodes have all been when things are out of control, like everyone, right? When my dad died,
Mm-hmm.
when my marriage ended, which was very close to when my dad died. So that whole time period. Uh,
Wow,
the
double whammy.
Oh yeah, I was with Phantom at the time, Phantom of the
Mm-hmm.
Opera, and the show was closing, or our tour iteration of the show was closing. My marriage ended, and my dad died all within a year and a half. Um,
Yikes.
so that was a lot. And then, this is super connected in a lot of ways, but there are other issues of abuse that have come up that and when those are triggered, and I hate that word activated, but when those oh, my voice is getting funky. We're getting
Mm-hmm.
close to stuff. When those are activated, my anorexia is my it's my protection. It's my way
Yeah.
of like, okay, I don't have to deal with all of that because I'm just going to deal with getting smaller and smaller and
Mm-hmm.
smaller. And sometimes it can help for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
what I've kind of come is that those are always going to be there. Those activating factors, those, you get a role in a movie and it somehow triggers you into something that you didn't expect it to do, which was what triggered an episode for me that lasted several years and is probably the
Mm-hmm.
closest I ever got to dying. I was a
Mm-hmm.
little crazy a few years ago. Um, and it came from a movie. Like I was in a movie. What?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's nuts. But what I've discovered, and with help, obviously, I have never done, that's not true. I did one group therapy, like one, and that was not a good situation for me.
I do not recommend group therapy. However, if you find it helpful, anybody who's listening, more power to you. It is not what I would. Group therapy is different than 12 steps, is different than
Yeah.
individual therapy. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. I did not have a good experience at all. But I have been lucky. I've had both good and bad therapists, but have had a good therapist for quite a while now and had one good therapist in San Francisco, or two in San Francisco as well, that gave me structure. And what I've learned through all of these years, and I'm still in therapy and probably will be forever, is that it doesn't get easier, right? It doesn't get
Mm-hmm.
easier. The triggers change, the situations change, what's hard changes, but it's not like it gets easier. My students are always like, when I'm out of school, it'll be better. I'm like, no, no, it won't. It will just be different.
No,
And what
no, yep.
happens is just you get more skilled and you recognize what it is that you're like, oh, if I do this, if I make this choice, this is how that progresses. But if
Mm-hmm.
I stop and make this choice now, it might be hard, but hopefully we're not going to go down that road. Um,
Mm-hmm.
one of my when I this movie that I was talking about was it came at me from every angle, and it was about sexual assault and really activated some stuff that I was not ready
Mm-hmm.
to deal with. And I literally remember leaving set and going, I'm not going to eat anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a conscious decision. And how it connected, I have no idea. And I was not in therapy at the time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't recommend that drop there. That's where you get in trouble. um,
Yep, yep, yep.
uh, but I remember, and I was an adult. This was not all that long ago. This was since I've been in LA. When did we do that project with Matt? 12 years ago,
Well, I believe that Matt passed in 2014.
and we had done
And
that
so,
maybe 4 years prior. Does that
yeah,
sound right?
maybe. Yeah.
So this, like, I'm a grown up. Like, I'm freaking old. So this last episode, which I haven't fully recovered from physically, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
still there in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Happened that when
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fully formed grown up, I was teaching, I was working, I was doing all of these things, and I just was like, I'm not going to eat anymore. Like, I can just cut that part out. Like, that's not an adult saying solution to the
Mm-hmm.
problem, but that was
Mm-hmm.
what I could grab onto. And I think that that's what people who don't struggle with eating disorders don't understand, that it actually is this thing, right? It's this thing that
Mm-hmm.
you can hold, and even when everything else is falling apart, you're like, well, I can control this. I can hold on to this. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make it better. It doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
but it is this thing, right? I
Yeah,
don't
it
know.
feels it, I always say it like it was kind of my it's my longest best friends of all my vices. I'd
Yeah.
say my favorite one is drinking. I've been sober for over since 2019. Um that was my favorite one, but like my most consistent longest running that feels almost like a relationship or a best friend is the eating disorder, and that one started when I was at least 12, 13.
Yeah.
And so it definitely, I completely relate to what you're saying. And I completely agree. It is that thing that you can lean on in the moment. And sometimes it's knee jerk. And sometimes you don't realize you're doing it. And sometimes you know exactly that you're doing it. But it
Hmm.
is that thing to lean on. And it doesn't make anything better. For me, it makes things worse because my brain doesn't work. And then I'm like,
Right.
whatever anxiety I had is like tenfold now because I'm not regulating my hormones are all what cortisol is like, surging and just like I'm sure a doctor could say exactly what's happening, but I know for a fact now I'm not my best. So it doesn't actually help. It makes things worse. But in the moment it feels like that and it is the control thing.
Yeah.
I would just like to say I think you qualify because you be biking and doing all that stuff. You said in college you would like or in the company you're like, yeah, I just wouldn't eat and then I'd run 5 miles. Can I just tell you that I would identify as a very lazy person with an eating disorder? I am only interested in certain types of exercise. I am much rather restrict and do other things. But like the fact that you're doing all that exercise to me is like, oh yeah, you qualify because that's a lot of effort. I give you that. I'll validate you. I'll validate you, Nancy. You qualify.
Thank
You
you.
qualify. You fit the criteria, girl.
It's interesting because when they have all those stupid quizzes and you check things off,
Yep.
right? Do I, do
Yep.
I, do I? And I do have other vices as well. I don't talk about it much, but it's very obvious and evident. I cut. I don't anymore. I haven't for quite a while. I'm gonna say it. I've recovered. I have not
Mm-hmm.
fallen into that trap in many years now, but my scars are very obvious and evident to anyone who looks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what was my point on this? Oh, you check things off, right?
Right.
Do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this? And
Right.
you're like, yes,
Right.
I have checked off every single box in that. And then you go to a doctor or somebody and they gaslight you and they're like, well, you're
Mm-hmm.
functioning, so you can't be that anorexic. And I'm like,
Right. You're not losing your
dude,
hair. You still have your period. Like or those types of things, which is
right.
like
Or even if
okay.
you, I mean, if we're going to talk about periods, sure, every so often, right?
Right.
Or yeah, well, did you see how much hair I had 20 years ago? Because
Right.
there's a lot less of it now. And yeah, sure,
Yeah.
there's age, but also I remember which particular episode killed my hair, right? I used to
Right.
do hair
Mm-hmm.
commercials, right?
Mm.
So you're like, sure, dude. It's always a dude. Sure, dude.
It could be a lady too. Ladies could still gaslight, but probably more often a dude.
Yeah, they're like, "Well, you weren't hospitalized, so it couldn't have been that bad." And I'm like, "Okay,
And that's how
thank
I always felt. I never went
yeah,
to an inpatient thing. I never got to a weight that was like scary or that anyone would say, "Oh, you're out of like you're dangerous." But it was extreme for me. I never lost my period. Even as thin as I got, I never lost my periods. But does that mean that my hormones were doing well? Starving? No, probably not. But yeah, so it's a head trip. It's like why I love this topic for the podcast and it being so much gray because
yeah,
I think those of us that struggle with some of these things, we really want a black and white. Everything would be easier if it's black or white. And it would be easier for me to accept if I knew that I fit this qualification, this fit. Even when I was quote unquote kind of like going into therapy and diagnosed, they were like, yeah, you'll be in the category of disordered eating. And even that felt good. I was like, oh, I'm a thing. Okay. Well, cool. Okay, so now I feel like I qualify. So I can actually like take this seriously, oddly enough. But and that's why I say the whole thing at the end, like you don't actually need to be super sick to get help. Like just
Mm-mm.
so you know, like let's stop this, because it is so much that. And I'm so glad you brought that part up and share that because I think that's like it's a roadblock for people to get help. It's already hard enough to love yourself enough for those of us that struggle with this stuff. It's already hard enough to love yourself enough to be like, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do what's best for me. That is already really, really fucking hard. So then to take another step and be like, I qualify, or to relate in a way that would get you to that next step. Because the first roadblock, if you can get past, I'm worth it enough, which is
Mm-hmm.
a tall, tall wall. If you can climb over that wall, then it's like, well, do I even qualify? Am I even, and that can if all you know is a quiz, if all you know is what the doctor says, that could stop you from going any further to get any kind of help.
Yeah,
That could be the dead end.
for sure. For sure. And um yes. And this is such a great segue actually because I think that one of the things that's unique in and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that because it is so gray and then we're in this position of teaching, right? And we're in this position of leadership. Um, and I think that that's such an interesting place to be. But the only way it's ever talked about is how we can help the students coming up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how we can recognize it and how we can um, change the patterns. And we can, and all of that is super important and amazing. But I think what's not talked about is how hard that is on us personally, right?
Mm.
I don't know if you've had this experience, and maybe it's just me, but I have talked about it with a few other people who are like, okay, so and so is clearly struggling. How does, what can we do? How can we fix it? But then you go home and I'm like, but that somehow triggers, activates, makes me
Mm-hmm.
feel weird. And
Mm-hmm.
and so there are a couple questions that come up for me. Am I projecting onto that student? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that student's totally fine and I'm projecting because they look away I think I wanted to look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or or is something I'm saying causing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or then also, okay, I've got them help, but now I feel like I'm somehow less than because they're better at it than I am, right? Which is just completely
Mm-hmm.
fucked up and twisted. Sorry, are we allowed to swear on your podcast?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think that there's this like weird dynamic in being in a teaching situation where you're constantly having to assess for this and especially in moments like I've been teaching when I'm in very serious episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still trying to like gauge these students, and I hope I'm not screwing my entire life up by saying all of this on out loud, but whatever. You know what I mean? That there's
No, I
there
don't
there's
think
this
so. It's
honesty, there's an
yeah.
honesty that you have to have with yourself when you're working with students in this kind of situation, right? Where you're
Yeah.
like, okay, I see that you're struggling and you have to look at it without your eating disorder brain.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at it from this really unbiased place.
Mm-hmm.
And so separating that out is actually helpful for the student, but can be super detrimental for you in
Right,
a
right.
way. Am I
There
making
could be
sense?
a
I'm kind of,
cost.
yeah, there's a
No,
cost in
completely.
it, in
Yeah.
staying in
Yeah.
the, and so that's what one of the things what you said earlier when you're like people say, "Oh, well, that was me earlier." I wonder if people who stay in the same industry, right, who stay with the
Mhm.
same groups of people are have a harder time. I don't know,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I don't know if it's part of the cost of continuing to do what we love, that we're constantly reassessing that, right? You're already reassessing it as a performer over and over again because our bodies
Mm-hmm.
naturally change no matter what, not just with,
Mm-hmm.
not in regards to weight even. You talk about your injury with your knee. I had a really bad accident a year and a half ago, which was super activating for this. Being triggered and being activated in an eating disorder has no relationship to whether or not you actually gain or lose weight. That has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with it, but in the real world, it does. So there's all
Right.
these things swirling about us all the time that I think I might be babbling, but
No.
that make it such a challenging road to walk in integrity, right? Where you're like, I need to help you. And then the student looks back at you and is like, really? You're going to help me with this? Right? And I'm like, well, yes, I
Oh
am.
no.
Because,
Yeah.
right? I can.
Yeah.
I'm older.
Yeah.
I know how to walk through it. Maybe you can trust me more. So there's part of it
Yeah.
is like, hopefully you can trust me. Like, I see that you're cutting.
Right.
You can
Right.
see anyone who looks like anyone who cuts knows that I cut, that I
Mm-hmm.
used to. I don't anymore, but that I used to, right? That's hard to say
Mm-hmm.
out loud. But so sometimes they trust me more, right? With
Right.
eating disorders, I feel like I don't know if we have that trust yet with our
Well, eating
students. I don't
disorders, I have
know.
to say, and I've said this a bunch of times, I do find that of all the isms, of all the things, of all the disorders, of all the diseases, people with eating disorders are some of the most secretive people, and they're also
Hmm.
some of the most untrusting. That
Hmm.
secrecy and the otherness, the separation, the insulating of the self, the creating that bubble around yourself and having that denial of food as something that you can always keep away from people. You can always keep away from celebration. You can always keep
Yep.
away from those things. That is very much a hallmark. I do understand exactly what you're saying. Mine is slightly a little different. Whereas I'm a teacher and I teach, predominantly older adults and then like, teenagers. And I don't have anything in place of like really what, reporting or anything like that. I know you
Hmm.
work in a higher education, so it's a little different. I feel like I can pick people out who may be struggling. And that's when I'm like, what is my role in this moment? And if I say something, I don't want to say, the ones you can see, because there's tons of them you can't see. So
That's
I
really
assume
important.
statistically that probably most of the people I'm dealing with have something. They're dealing with something. And there's the ones you can see that are aka disappearing like you did. And you can see it and you're like, if I bring it up, this is like heroin to a junkie. If you tell someone who's actively disappearing, actively starving, that they look thinner, that is like, thank you very much. Thank you for noticing my hard work. Now I will look even better. I will get even more praise. I will feel even better
Hmm.
if I do another 10 pounds. So it's a very slippery slope of being able to like figure out how you can help someone other than just being like, hey, are you okay? Like I'm here if you need anything. And it is also very tricky because anytime you're dealing with recovery of something, it is a constant battle of what is being activated and you having to deal with that on top of like, I know if I'm going through an episode of depression or those are some of my hardest episodes, just to show up in the world, to still show up can take so much energy. To then on top of that try to help someone else is near impossible. And I think like I get that when you're in a higher education, there's a lot of responsibility on administrative, but just as humans, it is a lot to require someone because we are not really responsible for other people, minus if you have children, like they're your responsibility. But and that's what a lot of people who have children talk about is like if they're actually like aware of the deeper growth that you could have by having a child, they're constantly talking like about being activated, about being triggered, or how this person makes me have to be better and how I have to like work on myself and like deal with my own bullshit. And like, oh my God, this brought up so much about me as a kid with anxiety and math. And like, so it is very similar to teaching as,
Yeah.
having kids in that way of like you're facing yourself all the time. And it
Hmm.
does feel early before I was recovered I was very fixated on helping certain students that were struggling. But I didn't know what I knew I was being a fraud. I felt like a fraud because I was like, you are no better. You're just not you just don't look you just don't look like you got a problem. But like you're no better. You're doing the same shit. You're a fraud. Like anything you say to them, you're a fraud, you're making it worse. Like and I knew that and I couldn't really articulate it. I wasn't really ready to and again, I didn't think I qualified. So there's that. And there is that really, really sneaky little eating disorder voice who, like I like to say, gets in front of the bus, grabs the wheel, and says, look how great they look. You could do that too.
Yep. Yep. And we
So
need to,
that's
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that,
And
right?
like, look, that is an eating disorder voice. That's not my voice. My voice would say
Right.
they don't look good. They look malnourished. They look like a child.
Right.
They're not giving their body what they need. This is not healthy for them in their mind, in their body. They're separating themselves from life, from joy, from satiation, from so many things. This is not the way to tolerate. But the eating that voice, ooh, she's sneaky and she's in
Yep.
my, she is,
Yep.
she sounds just like my own voice. So it's sneaky. You have to in recovery there is like you have to field these thoughts. You have to take a what's that called, like a little strainer. You got to strain the
Hmm.
thoughts and you got to like really identify them because they're sneaky and they'll sound just like a regular thought, but that is not me and that is not what I actually think. That is my weird ass, self deprecating, oh look, they lost weight, you could lose weight too. Like, oh look at that product, someone's doing that. Oh, a keto diet, what's that about? Like what like which is one of my things. I'm not allowed to do diets, no matter what kind of diet I think it is. I'm not allowed to do new diets. I'm not even really allowed to research new diets. When they come up in my feed, part of my sobriety is not getting too into it, not clicking on the various links, not googling it, not trying to find out more about it because that is a slippery slope into doing something like that I think will net certain results.
Yeah. 100%.
So did you ever in your story and like through the episodes and now, like we talk about body tolerance, we talk about, being able to kind of like live and navigate through these episodes. Was there a moment or were there multiple moments where you realized like I need to do something different or I need help or this is like not cool? Was there like an actual situation or was it just kind of like a slow evolution towards something else?
I think that there have been numerous times, right,
Mhm.
where this has happened. When I was in Phantom, I got put in weight probation for being too thin,
Mhm.
which I thought was hilarious. Um, and I kind of took it seriously, but I kind of didn't because I was like, yeah, it's really hard to fire someone on an equity contract. You're
Did you
not going to
also
fire
get
me.
kind of excited though? Were you like,
I, of course, I
"Yes."
was, and I didn't
Okay.
believe them because everyone in that company was small. Like we were hired because we were small, right?
Okay.
So I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. This is just a power trip. You just want me to feel bad about myself. So I
Mhm.
didn't really believe them. After that show closed, like I said, during that time period, things got very, very, very dark in my life. I
Mhm.
was very suicidal. I was very depressed. I was very, very, very anorexic. Um, I actually attempted suicide uh, more than once. Um, not very well. I wasn't very good at it, but which is good, I suppose. But
I'm happy about it. I'm happy about you're not so great at suiciding. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
you
Thank you
know,
for failing at that.
um, so I realized I was in deep trouble then. And there were a couple times where therapists were like, "Look, I think you should be hospitalized. I'm not going to commit you, but I would support you doing so." And I was like, "No." But I would be in therapy 3 to 4 times a week. And
Mhm.
so um there have been moments like that. Sorry, I just got distracted for a second.
Well, it's like a low of a low. right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So I think for me, um, the anorexia is like this constant, and my depression is also a constant, but the
mhm,
suicidal tendencies, those are where my red flags pop, right?
got it.
When so that's how, and then honestly, this last accident has been very, very hard. Um,
Mhm,
there are parts of my body that won't recover, and that's a very weird situation to be in as a dancer and as a dance teacher and as a choreographer. You're like, I can't snap my fingers, and you snap your fingers that much, and I'm like, yeah,
you're
I
like,
fucking
yes.
do.
Yes, it's actually like part of choreography, and as a teacher, it is kind of a hallmark.
It's like, even though I'm not a jazz teacher, I do perform musical theater quite a bit. That's kind of my thing. And yeah, I can't, and I was going down the list actually with Lisa of choreographers that I would have to not work for, right?
Mm,
I'm like, I can't do Fosse. I'm not a big Fosse dancer, but now it's not even in the
mhm,
picture. Ryan,
right.
maybe Ryan's weird
Mhm,
enough that maybe he would like this weird hand that just flips
mhm.
people off but doesn't do anything else. But
I like your
a
hand that only flips people off, personally.
lot of
You can
people
work
like
for me. You can
it.
work for me, Nancy, any day.
Yay!
Yes.
Awesome.
The
Um,
single flip off hand is hot.
right, but I can't make a fist. Think about how
Right.
many times in choreography that you make a
Oh, yes.
fist,
Oh, yes.
right? And so I
Yes.
can't do that anymore. So to deal
Mhm.
with like those things, you're like, well, if I can't control that, what can I control, right? And
Yeah,
it's
back to it.
so pops in so fast. And I think I'm like, okay, good job. You kind of maneuvered through this one pretty
Mhm,
well and have stayed relatively sane. But it's
mhm,
because going back to those rules that I made earlier, I'm like,
mhm.
you don't have to eat a lot, but you have to eat twice a day.
That's what I
Bam.
tell myself too. If I'm really having a hard time, if something has thrown me for a loop, I'm like highly anxious if something very terrible is happening. I say that I'm like, you have to eat. You don't have to eat it all. Just start with a bite, like just something. Get it started. Make the attempt. Make the action. And then I usually am able to eat enough that would qualify as a good size snack or a meal, and then you know keep
Yeah.
it moving. Yeah, I relate to that.
It's yeah. I don't even remember what your
Why?
question was at this point.
Well, it was back basically, like what are there like some rock bottom situations, and you said the
Yeah.
red flags, those moments where you're really in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are like, okay, I have to reach out.
Yeah. But to be fair, I have been since probably, you know, 2000. I have been basically with a therapist, except for a
Mhm.
few times. And the last time I was not with a therapist at all was when I like, and that was pretty
Right.
bad. Um,
Right.
you know, so I think there's also just a humility in admitting that you're like, you know what? I don't have, I, I somehow did not develop enough of a survival structure growing up that I can do this on my own. And, partially I live alone. I don't have a partner. I don't have that. So I don't have someone to be like, hey,
Accountable. Yeah.
what's going on?
You
So,
can be sneaky.
yeah. So you need a therapist, right?
Mhm.
People are, you know, I tell people that I don't really have strong survival instincts, right? I, um, I don't have that, so I need some accountability that's
Mhm.
external, and I think
Mhm.
that's maybe part of an eating disorder psyche as well, that external validation is more important than our
Mhm.
internal, guides. I don't know if that's, clinically correct or not, but that's what it feels like to me. And I
Yeah.
think what's interesting about it as you get, when you're young, there is somebody's going to say something at some point, right? My 12-year-old camp experience aside,
Mhm.
most young people, when things start to go off the rails, somebody's going to notice. A teacher's going to notice. A parent is going to notice. Somebody is. But when you're an adult,
Mm-hmm.
there's no one who can say, no one's going to say it. They will talk about you behind your back for sure, but
Mm.
they're not going to actually say it to your face. They're not
Right.
going to say, hey, are you okay? Most
Mm-hmm.
people won't, even friends,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
We like to think that we will,
Mm-hmm.
and but at least in my experience, very few people have actually been like, when I'm in really dark places,
Mm-hmm.
very few people have been courageous enough to jump in there, right?
Right. Right.
And why would they? It's not great, right?
Right. Well, and yeah, and you're like, are you going to offend somebody? Also, like,
Mhm.
do people have the wherewithal to really notice? Because everybody is kind of very self
Right.
involved, and that's not a bad thing. That's just is what it is. You
Right.
know,
Right.
there's a lot of that. Like, I really get that for sure.
And once again, then we go back to our industry, which is where we actually often get rewarded at our sickest.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is shifting. And the more that I think our generation and the generation coming up after us, um, these generations that grew up in the 80s and 90s moving
Mm-hmm.
into leadership, and we're in leadership now. Uh, I
Mm-hmm.
don't like to admit that, but we uh, are changing things. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely, if you look at the dancers on stage in ballet companies, even, but certainly in award shows, certainly in concert dance, look very different from the dancers who were on stage 20 or 30 years
Mm-hmm.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's a huge range. There's a much bigger
More diversity of what that
diversity.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at American Ballet Theater, it's not really that different. Right? If
Right.
you look at Joffrey Ballet, it's not that different.
Right.
If
There's
you
certain
There are
things
little
that are
changes.
just stubborn to
Yeah.
change. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
then
I
oh, sorry.
nope, nope. Go ahead.
And then also, I think that that's really attached to other forms of consent, right? So, the I alluded to it earlier, but there is a whole undercurrent or overcurrent of abuse in many people, and I don't know if that's directly connected to eating disorders, or if I did some research for my MFA that is like, are 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 we more prone to, are people with certain uh, physical or emotional makeups,
Traumas.
trauma, more prone to being groomed, right?
Mm.
How does that work? My research didn't actually show that, which surprised me.
Oh.
Um, right? It's surprising. There may be more research there that I just didn't get to,
Mhm.
but there is definitely a connection to us being disconnected from our bodies because we're touched,
Mhm.
when we were growing up, no one said, "Hey, may I adjust your leg?" They just took it,
Right.
yanked it. They,
Yep.
pulled you up. They did whatever they wanted. And
Right.
many teachers still work that way. I look
Mhm.
through ads for ballet schools, right?
Mhm.
And in almost every ad, the teacher's physically manipulating a student still today, to this very day.
Mhm.
And I'm like,
Mhm.
y'all know you shouldn't be doing that. You have
Right,
to,
especially in an ad, it's one thing if you're like having a conversation and that's like, can I make an adjustment, and that's after you've failed to communicate what it is. Like if you've tried to tell them verbally and they're not understanding, can I make an adjustment? Can I show you, you
yeah.
know, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's so much research into, and I work with a bunch of organizations. I work with Minding the Gap. I work with Dan Send. I work with uh, those are the two that come to mind. There's Consent Wizardry. There's all of these great organizations and intimacy coordinators and intimacy
Mhm.
directors, all of which are new on the scene,
Mhm.
um, but that talk
Thanks,
about
Harvey. Thanks,
Yeah,
Harvey Weinstein. Kind of.
totally.
The
Kinda.
intimacy coordinators,
For
those are
sure.
very new, and it's definitely post Me Too.
Yeah, post Me Too.
Intimacy coordinators, for people who don't know, an intimacy coordinator, as far as I know, it's a newer role. I never heard of them previous to like 2019 is when I had my first one that I've ever even like knew about. And it's someone who basically is your uh helps you navigate your scene or your situation. So, for instance, my scene was that I was a burlesque dancer in performing on film for a move for an episode. And so this intimacy coordinator connected with me via phone previous to the shoot, said, "Hello, I'm your intimacy coordinator. I'm going to be helping you. I'm here to help communicate anything that you're comfortable or uncomfortable with. I'll be with you that whole day. If you have any concerns going into the shoot, let me know. I'm here as your ally. I am here for you and only you." And then on set, what they do is they just kind of be with you and they constantly make sure you're okay. Like, this intimacy coordinator was like, "Would you like a different place to change? Why don't we do this over here?" And I was very comfortable. So I'm like, "No, this is fine for me, or this is fine. I'm fine with being over here." But they were really like willing to like throw down. And this is to keep actors and actresses and people from getting pushed into doing things they don't want to do, by producers, by directors, by other people. And they're there solely to protect people. And that is definitely very recent. It is not something that I recall ever hearing about or having in the past. That's so great that you're working with these organizations. And
Yeah.
so you think there's a tie between maybe a lack of self and an inability to consent sometimes, or like be able to be in control of the body because of that.
I totally think there is. And I think that part of that is like, part of it is just bad training, right? Most of the dance training that is done in this country is terrible. And then you come to LA, San Francisco, Chicago, or New York, and suddenly you're being retrained, right?
Right.
I talk to
Yes.
my college kids about this all the time. I'm like, who were your teachers? They were the older kids in the
Hmm.
studio. They don't know what they're talking about.
Uh-huh.
So
Right,
they'll
right.
tell you to suck in your tummy because they don't know how to say engage the upper and lower abdominal muscles, connect those to your low back, spread your spine longer, and that's going to create the strength. All they know to say is like, "Oh, well, your stomach's sticking out, so tuck it in." Right? Which starts the creation of all of these problems. So part of it's just education as dancers, and then part of it is this history and this tradition of lack of consent in every way, shape, and form as dance teachers. And I think that's
Hmm.
absolutely connected to the fact that we're not used to being in control. So the one place that we can find control is in how we eat and how we can maintain our bodies. And so as teachers who were trained in one way but are trying to build a world in another, we're just constantly in this place of what are we doing? Is it okay? Is it right? Is it wrong? Right? And I think that that manifests once again in, well, if I control myself, right? If I control what I'm doing, then I can teach them to control themselves, which can
Hmm.
become like weird circle in a way. I don't
Hmm.
know.
I
Um,
think also people who like to dance because it is so controlling of the body and so specific and so
mhm.
detail oriented, I do think that is a type of person that also is drawn to dance that would have like almost like a uh prerequisite to have an eating disorder or something like that.
Oh, for sure. Like I said, I didn't start dancing until I was 14, but I was well on my
Hmm.
way much earlier
Right,
than that.
right, right.
Yeah.
Um, Good. There's one thing you said, not good to your well on your way, but good on those answers. I am very much relating and liking all the information you're giving. And that through line with teaching is also really interesting. And I haven't really considered that as an outer ring of all this stuff. So I'm really glad you're bringing that up. There, you had mentioned like that you feel like you didn't learn survival skills, like, or that your survival skills were not very good. I relate to that because of how I have to like make sure that I'm doing certain things, which seem like it shouldn't be so difficult for me to do, like that
Mhm.
it has to be so forward front of my brain. Um, and it just reminded me this one time, and this is like not long ago. So like when I tell this story, this isn't like 10 years ago. This is like, like not that long ago. I was on a job and I was talking to another person on the job in a different department, and we both were like highly stressed in our positions. And we both were working with people for people that were very stressed and were passing some of that stress on to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was an anxious, nervous, freaked out mess, and she was fine. And I asked her, I was like, I feel like you and I are going through something similar, but you seem very calm, whereas I do not feel very calm. And and she said, "You know, I just have a really strong sense of self." And so these things that are happening and this person that I'm dealing with, it doesn't really affect me because I've always just had a really strong sense of self. And I was like, "So what is that? What is that you talk of? This sense of self thing? Like what can you tell me more? And where do I find one? Can I purchase it somewhere? Is it on Amazon? Can you send me the link?" Because I was like, "Well, yeah, that makes so much sense, not just for you, but for me because I don't feel like I had that growing up." And I want to make something clear. I don't know exactly how to describe what a sense of self is. It is not what you like or dislike. I'm very clear about things I like and dislike. I like
Mm-hmm.
certain foods. I dislike certain foods. I like certain colors. I dislike certain colors. But there is something about not knowing where I end and other things begin and not
Mm-hmm.
understanding or being able to protect myself from that.
Oh my God, you just articulated that so brilliantly. That's so it, right? This sense of these emotions and traumas that it's like you're porous
Mhm.
and they do this, right? We're on a podcast. I'm bringing my hands between one and
Yes,
the
she's
other.
articulating a lack of emotional boundaries through her hands. So, like, it's like it's permeable, it's porous. Like, whereas other people who maybe have a strong sense of self, they have like, they might be like a balloon that you can see through, but they have a nice, like, a protective barrier. And for
Yeah.
me, having that eating disorder was a protective barrier, but it didn't actually keep me from being in pain or suffering or traumatizing or not being able to feel those things. All it did is kept me a little more separate from people I loved, a little more separate from occasions and celebration, a little more separate from things I cared about, a little bit separate from fully engaging in the moment.
Because you don't have time to, because there's so much
No.
like you have to control in your
Yeah, there's so much obsession to be had.
exactly. And that obsession keeps you from a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And it certainly keeps you from relationships. And I
Yes.
mean, and then there's also what's I think super interesting as well in the we don't like push or engage, especially as adults. We're not going to say like, oh, are you okay? We don't see these struggles as much, but also we get much better at hiding them,
Mhm.
right? We've been friends a really long time. We
Mhm.
just started talking about this, right?
Right. Right.
um and I'm not sure like if someone even 5 years ago had said, um, "Does Jillian struggle with anything like this?" I would have been like, "That woman is so on top of everything.
Including
She's
secrets and hiding.
right, right." But I would have just been like, "She's one of my idols. Look at the way she works. Look at the way she teaches. Look at her boyfriend." Right? Everything seems from the outside like you have it together. Right? And
Mhm.
I think most of us, to a certain degree, have that facade by the time we
Mhm.
become so adept at dealing with this voice in our head all the time and these controls, all this stuff, that to the
Mhm.
outside world we do have that barrier, right?
Mhm.
And that actually makes it harder to deal with the problems,
Mhm.
right? It's the functional part, right? People are like, oh, she's functionally anxious or functionally suicidal or functional X, Y, or Z, right?
Yep.
A
I like to
functional
call it
alcoholic.
walking depression.
Yeah.
Like walking pneumonia, but it's walking depression. Like,
That's a that's brilliant. And it's true.
mhm.
Um, and I think that as teachers is this really funky place to be in.
Yeah.
And I don't have any answers. I just think
Yeah.
that we should Dan Sen posted the other day. Um, it was she they the Michelle was posting and she said, we thought a long time about posting this because it's really, really activating. And it said,
Mhm.
what do dancers hear when they say healthy dancer? And the little voice
Mm.
inside the dancer says fat. And I said,
Mm.
and how do we deal with this as teachers when that's still the voice we hear? That's still
Mhm.
what we hear. If someone says, oh, you look so healthy.
Mm.
You look so much healthier. Oh, you
Mhm.
must be doing really well. You look really healthy.
Mhm.
And I don't know a single person with with an eating disorder history or even a dance history, to be perfectly honest,
Mhm.
who
Right.
doesn't hear, "Oh, you've gained weight or you look fat"
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
that statement. And until we're really honest about that, right? The
Mhm.
honesty and removing the shame and removing the blankets that
Mhm.
cover what we're saying, what we think all the time, it's going to be really hard to break those cycles. Because if
I
someone is
agree.
saying, "I just want you to be healthy," and you hear them
Right.
say,
And
"I just
you
want you
hear
to be
something else.
fat,"
Yeah.
then
You're like,
you're
never
at a
know if
right,
that's
you're
the thing. Yep.
yeah. So, I that what Dance Fund is an organization I really like the way that they are verbalizing a lot of what we hear in our heads. Um,
Well, we'll definitely put them in the show notes for people to
yeah,
check out.
and
There's
Minding the Gap is
another,
another one that's really great.
we'll put both of those in
Yeah.
the show notes so you can find them links below. Um, there's something that also, in that part that you just shared, there is this. I think I'm fairly certain it's on YouTube. I'll put it in the show notes. It's called this woman who was, her job is doing women's studies. And there was some kind of a survey or something that they give all these women. And it was like, would you rather be hit by a bus or overweight or fat, whatever word you want to use? And almost all of them said they'd rather be hit by a bus. And she was so shocked by that information. She went on, she does like, I don't know if it's a TED talk but I'll find it. I'll put it on. And it's called Beauty Sick. And she talks
Mm.
about the preoccupation with being thin and also with being beautiful, and how essentially, because of our uh, consumption of social media and advertisements and things like that, that it's almost become where we are not having human experiences anymore. We're basically looking at the world as how the world's looking at us instead of us looking at the world. And I thought that was like a very interesting observation. And I'll put that in the show notes if you're interested. I think it's just brilliant. It really was really helpful to me when I first very much started questioning my relationship with all of this stuff. And I want to go back and watch it again because I think it's something I should probably watch every 6 months.
Yeah.
But on this tip with some of the stuff you just mentioned, why don't you think more people, in particular dancers, discuss this topic? We, especially lately, we've been discussing inequality, we've been discussing racism, we've been discussing, abuse within our community and outside our community. But why don't we talk about this?
Um, I think we are more than we have been in the past for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm gonna go. I'm because my expertise is still ballet for this, right? The ballet world is definitely having a reckoning. It is a slow ass reckoning, but
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, many more companies are talking about it. Now talking about it and actually changing the behaviors, as we know, are two
Right.
different things, right?
Right.
Catherine Morgan, who has an amazing YouTube channel and Instagram, she's a ballet dancer and teacher now, was fired from Miami City Ballet recently, or left. I can't remember if she left or if it was one of those mutual, we're gonna uncast you until you walk away type situations. But she went
Mm.
public about the issues she'd had with them and weight. And when she was hired by them, just a real quick on Catherine Morgan. And Catherine, I apologize if I messed anything up about your history, but she was with New York City Ballet. She was quite on track to become a quite big star with them. She was a soloist, I think, when she left, and she got sick. She got
Mm.
hypothyroidism. Is that the one where it makes you
Yeah,
expand?
one of the whichever thyroid makes you gain, one makes you gain weight,
Yeah,
one makes you lose weight.
yeah.
And the only reason I know that is because I'm sick. Okay, go ahead. Like in my head.
I know it from my cat. Um,
Okay.
my sister's dog has hypothyroidism. Anyway, so she got quite sick, and she ended up leaving ballet for quite a long time, and then she did kind of a public comeback, and Miami City Ballet hired her because of her name, because of her stature, because of how, and they hired her at a certain weight. She never gained
Mhm.
weight while she was dancing, but they told her that she didn't look right, she couldn't be put in a tutu, blah, 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 all the ballet bullshit. And she went
Mhm.
public with it. And several dancers after that came through and also went public. And then there was a
Mhm.
big debacle with Jennifer Ringer of New York City Ballet as well. Got written up in a review by Alistair Macaulay in the New York Times where he said she looked like she'd eaten too many sugar plums. And
Mm.
she has a history of an eating disorder, which she's been very public about. She's a mother. She was all of that, but all of it's irrelevant to her dancing. And I think that
Mhm.
most of the people who joined the backlash about that said, but how did she dance? Because that's what we care about. How did she
Mhm.
dance?
Mhm.
Not whether she was 5 pounds heavier, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that conversation is starting to happen. But ballet people are tricky and they don't tell you to lose weight anymore. They tell you to lengthen your lines and they tell you to do all
Right.
sorts of other BS stuff, right?
Right. It's coded.
It's coded. So I think to go back to your original question, why don't we talk about it? I think, first of all, it's so shameful. I think that there's something in people with, maybe it's all people, but people, for me, I actually can tell you that I feel shame when I need to eat, right?
Mhm.
It's shameful to have to be
Mhm.
a corporal being. And when you combine that with an industry that rewards you for being ethereal and light as air and, you know, otherworldly and all of these words that mean the opposite of a physical breathing being,
Mhm.
it's really hard to talk about it because
Mhm.
it's shameful to actually need to exist, right? Oh, sorry, baby.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I relate to that. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And so I think that, artists like Lizzo who are very, very vocal, speaking up and hiring dancers who look like her or look like
Mhm. Mhm.
different than, the Barbie dolls that we're used to seeing.
Right.
Um, and I think that we also need to be careful that just because you're tall, blonde, and thin doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? There gets to be this
Right.
backlash in it,
Right. Where like if
which,
anyone's thin, it's like a whole other thing, and that could
yeah.
be just how that person is. That could be their body, and they're being shamed for being that body.
Right. So I think that it's a complicated quagmire of issues that humans don't like complicated issues. We like things that
No,
are
we want
black and
black and white.
white.
Keep it categorized. Um,
Exactly.
in these moments, and I love that you talk about ongoing recovery. It's not it's up and down. It's through lined. It's there's no end point. You're not like, oh, I recovered from a one thing time deal and it's over, which I also very much relate to. In
Hmm.
those moments of where you're really what you would say like in your recovery, right? Not in the
Hmm.
sickness, but in the recovery. And in those moments of recovery, like what is there anything you would say that like you can feel like you gained? Like is there anything in those recovery that you're like, when I'm in recovery, when I'm not in my sickness, like this is what I gain?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
right? That's like a hard one.
There's
I'm basically trying to pitch recovery to people. Like for
yeah,
me,
no, I love
being
that.
in recovery, I gain community, number 1, because
Yeah.
I'm out about it, right? The minute I start talking about this, I gain community. I gain other people that are saying me too. And
Hmm.
once I have light on my shadows, they cease to exist or they're not able to flourish the same way. They're not able to like run freely.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've personally gained in when I'm in recovery and in recovery is being able to actually enjoy the full experience. So if I am somewhere, I am somewhere. Like being at the barbecue and not being part there. Going on the trip and enjoying the entire trip. Not having this weird pre, post, and during mental suffering and
Yeah.
obsession.
I
Not that it
think
doesn't come up, but it's like, okay, and moving on.
yeah. I think that there's a groundedness
Mm,
when you allow yourself to be in your body, right?
mhm,
And when you're restricting, and I'm going to be very careful here because I, like I said, I function very well. I would have a hard time saying that I'm fully recovered, right? I
mhm,
think I'm very functional. I think I'm very aware
mhm,
of when I'm starting to get out of balance in a way.
mhm, mhm,
Um, but I think what brings me back to understanding that the balance is better than the mania,
mhm,
right? Because there's a space to be present. And
mhm.
I think I probably was in this industry for 10 years before I ever ate on set,
Mm.
right? One
I
of the
relate to
big
that.
one of the big things about
One
being
of the
on set,
perks. One
it's
of
a
the
perk,
perks.
right? It's part of your
Yes.
pay is
It's
to
yeah, you get all the good foods, all the things. You're there all day.
right.
You got nothing
You
better to do.
yeah, and I don't think I ate on set for probably I'm gonna say I haven't for 90% of my career. Oh no, I'm fine. I'm not hungry.
I
I'm
did that too.
good, you
I did
know?
that too.
And first of all, you're on set for fucking 18 hours. That's just really stupid,
Yeah, they're really long
right?
days. They're
They're
really
really
long
long
days.
days. Or, when you're doing 8 shows a week,
Right.
which I did for many, many years, right? 8 shows a
Mhm.
week is really hard if you're starving to death.
Yeah, and for people who aren't as familiar with a show schedule like that, that means that multiple days you have double shows, which means you have to clock in minimum an hour before. And that's if you're someone who doesn't really like to do a ton of warm up, doesn't have a ton of makeup to put on, doesn't have a complicated costume or wig prep. So like you have to clock in minimum an hour before, and you will stop me if I say something wrong. And that's if you don't have all those other things, then you have to do the show, which is at least 2 hours, 3 hours.
Mhm.
Then
Right.
there's after the show where you have to put your stuff away, reorganize, hang up your whatever you got to do. And then it's not long after you're going to have another show. So that is a long day and a lot of physical output. And to not eat at all is going to be rough.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
going to be rough.
And if you're in a long running show, the 8 shows is the least of what you're doing, right? You have
Hmm.
understudy rehearsals, you have put in rehearsals,
Right.
you have
Right.
cleanup rehearsals, you have all the other gigs that if you're lucky enough to work, you're
Right. Those
doing
side hustles. Yep.
side hustles while you're doing your 8 show a week because you don't know how long that job's going to last because our
Right.
industry
And
has
we
literally no
always,
stability.
yeah. So we always take that gig. It's like, oh, you want to do this extra gig on Monday night? Come, dance around at some party, and you're like $600, $400. You're like, yes, yes, I will
Yes, I
take
do.
that money and run. Yes, we do.
Uh-huh.
We do. We always overbook.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that having the space to do that is where like yes, I do have the energy. Yes, I do, and my physical body can recover. I'm not waking up with cramps because I don't have enough potassium in my system, right? I
Mm-hmm.
always, this may be TMI, but one of my symptoms, which as soon as I start restricting, I get like Charlie horses at night.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's
because
TMI. Mine is I get constipated. Like I won't poop. I won't poop because I'm not putting enough food through my system. And so the
okay.
first time I'll eat something that's like, maybe has more of a starch consistency, that's going to constipate me. And then I'm going to be
Oh.
really upset. So that's my TMI. Yours is like, this may be TMI, but I get muscle cramps. I'm like, oh, I'll take you that and raise it. Mine shows up as not pooping. How's that for fun?
Oof.
Good times.
That's what I think. That's another thing that I don't think people talk about enough is how unromantic anorexia and eating disorders are, right?
Oh yeah.
There's this like idea that it's all like just ethereal and light. No, it's terrible. It's physically gross. All of it is
Hmm.
physically gross. And I don't think
Hmm.
people understand that. So I'm just going to say recovery is much less gross than illness.
That's a good way to put it. I'll
How's
definitely
that?
take that, and I agree with you. Thank you for putting it that way. Last, I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Now I'm not in the business of giving advice.
Oh boy.
I don't think I should ever give advice, especially unsolicited. But do you have any suggestions for anyone who might be suffering right now?
Oh, yes. And I also try not to give advice, but I do occasionally. Sorry, there's a truck going by right now. It's loud. Um, but one is that if you're not happy, that's it. That's the clue. It's not how much you weigh or how much you eat or any of those things. If you're not happy, then that's when you get help. And
Mm.
I think my cat's fine. She's running around in circles. Uh,
She liked that answer.
she
That was
did.
the mic. That was a mic drop answer. If you're not happy,
Yeah.
that's it. If you're not happy, that's when you see help.
Yeah. There are people to help and look for, oh my God, quoting Mr. Rogers, but look for the helpers, right? And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a therapist, right? I believe in therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy and really their whole lives because look at the
Hmm.
world. But it doesn't have to be a therapist. But you
Right.
want to be the only caveat to that is make sure whoever you're asking for help for is actually a helpful person, right?
Right.
Because I
Right.
think especially in the dance world, especially eating disorder world, we take advice all the effing time, and that advice
Hmm.
is 99.9% really terrible.
Right.
So
Right.
when you get help, make sure that whoever you're getting help from is qualified, and I'm not saying qualified in a doctor,
Right. Coaches can
education.
help. Yeah, coaches can help. Certain books can help. Certain, you know, uh, life helper people, teachers, mentors, some depending on their previous
Yeah,
expertise, qualifications, and life experience, and then obviously therapists and
yeah,
therapist adjacent type people.
yeah. But that's mine. If you're not happy, then that's it. That's the sign. The sign is not if you're losing weight or your hair's falling out or you can't get through a petit
Hmm.
allegro.
Hmm.
It's do I feel that I'm doing what I want to be doing, and am I who I want to be,
Hmm.
right? Am I do I wake up with dread or do I wake up excited?
Hmm. That's great. It's very, very wise. Very wise. I love that answer.
Oh.
Nancy Dobbs Owen, thank you so, 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 so,
Ah!
so much for taking time, being here, and laying down some truths and telling us about your experience. I am so thankful you go on the record with me today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Ah.
Yay. Thank you. I can't thank Nancy enough for being on Gray Maybe and sharing her experiences so authentically. Nancy and I have known each other for a while, and during that time, while both of us were struggling, neither one of us were able to really help or support the other. I really relate to balancing the activating triggers that happen when you're trying to help others when it's hard enough to help yourself. One of the worst things about being unrecovered is not being able to help anyone else because you can't help yourself. I'm hoping through sharing our continued journeys of the spectrum of recovery truthfully, that Nancy and I can be a catalyst for change and recovery exploration with others who may be suffering, or as Nancy so brilliantly stated, just not happy. I hope you found something that resonated in my conversation with Nancy today. If you're listening to this episode and you're realizing that you're more like Nancy and I than not, welcome. And I hope this helps you take a step in the direction of recovery if you haven't already. You're not alone. Just a reminder for anyone who needs to hear it, you don't need to wait until you're sick enough to get help. In fact, you don't have to be sick at all, just a desire to feel a little better. If you're listening and right now you're struggling with an ED, disordered eating, or other behaviors, welcome. Know that whatever you're feeling, there are those among us that have probably felt it too. You're not alone. If you're listening because you have someone you love in your life that is suffering or is in recovery for an ED, welcome. You're also not alone. Even having an eating disorder myself, I have not reacted the best I could to others who were struggling before my own recovery. I've attached the do's and don'ts of how to deal with someone suffering in the show notes, as well as how to contact Nancy and myself, and various links for help and recovery when and if you're ready. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you were able to find something relatable in today's episode. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this is also a social experiment to see if in telling my story, I can embolden listeners to share their stories. If you'd like me to read your recovery story on this topic, anonymous or otherwise, on the podcast, please email graymaybestories@gmail.com, graymaybestories@gmail.com. Thank you to everyone who helped make this Gray Maybe podcast happen. Producer and editor, Roderick Barge. Cover photo by Jose Perez. Music licensed by Pixabay. Special counsel Jada Ellingham and Roderick Barge. Special shout out to supporter Patty Olgan. If you'd like to support this podcast, please rate, share, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now.